Hi, everyone. It's Dylan Taggart. I'm here again for another episode of HRTechChat, as brought to you by 360 Insights. I'm here with Lilith Christiansen today. Lilith is the founder and lead consultant of HumanGenuity. She's also the former Chief Strategy and Product Officer at Silk Road Technologies. And prior to joining Silk Road, she was the VP of Organization Development Practice at Kaiser Associates. She focuses on programs and processes to help people thrive in an organization, and we're happy to have her here today. Lilith, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Dylan. I'm excited to be here.
And in the event I missed anything you'd like to tell people about yourself before we dive into some questions?
Sure. I mean, I think the most exciting thing or kind of new news on my front is that I've launched HumanGenuity after being at Silk Road, now Rival, for the last 6 years. I've decided to return to working directly with organizations to really focus in on helping them create exciting programs and experiences that really help their employees thrive. So I'm excited to be back on the hands-on side of the business.
Nice. Well, it's perfect for my first question, which is, now that you are taking a more hands-on role, what are some of the trends you're noticing, and what are some of the major movers from your perspective?
Mhm. So I think what I have seen the most so far really is a continuation of some of the trends that began emerging as a result of COVID, which I would define as really being a double down and a focus on the employee experience by organizations. I think I have seen those that are succeeding the most as being ones that are really being thoughtful and careful around how they're engineering that experience so that they allow their employees to really reach their highest potential. And as a result of that, really start seeing improved business outcomes. I've also seen a lot more technology taking hold and newer entrants into the market. I think we've probably seen that across the board in many industries, just in terms of the use of artificial intelligence and trying to determine the right way to harness that capability and do it in a way that enables an organization to succeed more quickly or to reach higher levels of performance. There's been a lot new entrants into the market that I've noticed, in particular to support around talent intelligence and helping to make more data-driven decisions around recruiting, development, learning opportunities, and supporting growth of the employee population.
So in terms of um, promoting employee growth for you, what would you say is the ideal employee experience right now that you could deliver to someone, in broad strokes, obviously, because every company is going to be different, but let's say, a company X company is starting up, and what are the must-haves for them to kind of ensure a great employee experience in 2024, given the trends you're noticing?
Mhm. Um, Certainly, as you said, Dylan, lots of different answers for different types of organizations and sizes of organizations. But if I had to think of what some of the key common threads are that make it most successful, is first, having a good understanding and definition around the culture and the core principles or operating principles for an organization, and using that as your first North Star, I guess, if you will, to make decisions around the talent experience or the employee experience. And once you have that set, then it's around thinking about how your processes are going to get executed, and are they operating in alignment with achieving against those particular operating values. So if it's around collaboration, then are we making decisions in a way, is the organization making decisions in a way that's bringing in input from a lot of different perspectives before a decision is made? Or do they notice that they're in fact kind of soloing it as leaders and making their own decisions and moving a path forward? So I think it's looking for alignment and ensuring that your processes are operating in consistency with those operating principles or core values. Another piece that I'd say is really important, and the sooner that an organization can begin operating in this way, say from its founding through its maturity, is around supporting the manager in that process of helping really supporting the employee in terms of that employee experience. I think that's a really critical linchpin to the overall success. And I'm sure we've all seen those studies around that individuals don't leave companies, they leave managers. So the more that I think an organization can provide support to the managers around what are best practices, how to engage with their employees, how to support that experience, I think is absolutely critical. One of the elements that I see always as a piece that helps drive success is around supporting feedback between a manager and an employee, or even between the employee and the organization at large. That if there's still a lot of work in progress, let's say, in formalizing programs and processes, if the organization starts by ensuring there is an active feedback channel between managers and employees and up through leadership, that in itself can really help the organization mature a lot more quickly. And when I think about feedback, what that means to me is it's providing positive reinforcement around what the employee is doing in their role. It's also providing development support for them. And it's the manager asking for feedback too from that individual. How is it going from your standpoint? Is there other ways that I could help support you better than what I'm doing now? And then lastly, to make sure that when there is insight shared either around the manager or around the organization more broadly, that something is done with that information, that it's not just kind of going into a black hole, but rather there's a kind of circle back to employees or the employee population around what was heard and what is being done or not, because sometimes we know we can't take action on every idea or piece of feedback that we receive from our employees, but it's just as important to share the context as to why not, because that can itself create a real learning opportunity for the organization or an individual.
And in terms of the culture you mentioned, and there's going to be a couple of questions, follow-up questions to what you just said. In terms of the culture aspect, is that something you feel like all employees are looking for, or all like people looking for a job are looking for? Like where do you feel culture kind of ranks within their kind of list of priorities? And is that more of a white collar trend or blue collar trend or both?
That's a good question, Dylan. I hadn't thought about necessarily differentiating it between blue collar versus white collar. The way that I look at it, and I think is pretty well proven out, is honestly to look back at that like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the first and foremost that any employee, whether it's an hourly position or salaried, different types of roles, is making sure, are they going to have their basic needs met? Are they getting the right kind of salary or compensation that they need? Is the work environment one that supports what's needed of them? And then beyond that, it gets to those next level pieces where I do think the culture comes in pretty quickly. And especially when we look at the diversity of generations in the workforce and what the up and coming generation is looking for, that experience that they're going to have and how the culture influences it, I really do see as being critically important. And what culture could mean, even if it's not as documented as the way I mentioned before, it's still the working norms of that organization. Does someone feel supported if that's what they need? Or do they prefer a more kind of solitary working environment? I do believe those are things that individuals are looking for no matter what their role is in the company or what industry they're playing in.
That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of the feedback channel, so you were talking about in the kind of the latter half of your first answer, What would you say is a good way to set up these feedback channels, especially during, given that, not everyone, but a good portion of especially corporate workers are still remote or hybrid. And so there's less face-to-face interaction. So less ways for this to kind of like, I guess, organically come up, like water cooler style, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And when you are setting up those channels, I could see how it could easily get into a way of there being too many checks and balances, perhaps, of like, okay, you got to submit a ticket, blah, blah, blah. And by the time you do that, you're just like, what, forget it. It's not that big of a deal.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming simple is better than complicated in that situation. But how would you set that up? And so it seems organic and somewhere you can actually kind of speak the truth, I guess, without feeling that you're going to be reprimanded.
Yeah. So I think a couple different ways come to mind for me. As you mentioned, there are certainly sophisticated systems that can be put in place that has the manager and the employee writing down their feedback and kind of showing that back and forth that happens. Putting that aside, what I would recommend is at a minimum providing managers with a guidepost around here are the 3 topics to cover once a month with your employees. How are things going? What's meeting expectations? What are you surprised about? And how can I help you achieve your goals? I guess that was actually more than 3, but a few just prompts for them that allows them to then have a more organic conversation with their employee without necessarily the rigor or stress of having to document that in some type of a formal form or process. So that's one way, is I would say just equip your managers with some talking points around the right kind of content to cover with your employees on a regular basis. The other piece that I think is important is creating avenues that allow the employees to provide feedback more broadly, say around the organization or observations that they're seeing and how things are going. And it may sound kind of silly, but it's almost like coming up with the old um, kind of analog version of a comment box. I think if organizations can provide a way that employees can provide feedback up to management or through HR, that's really important. So you can certainly do surveys on a regular basis, try to keep it short. If it's a employee engagement kind of pulse survey, if you're going to do it on a regular basis, maybe 6 or fewer questions that are going to be consistently asked, that allows you to get trend lines around what the pulse of the employees are in terms of their emotions, feelings, level of engagement. And then providing in some way of like you said, you don't want it to be so formal that it's a ticketing system that an employee has to fill out their information and they may have concerns around it being tracked back to them individually. But a lot of times being able to use um, someone within HR as being that individual that can collate information and feedback and then present it back to leadership in a consolidated way can really help then with ensuring more of the anonymity around feedback that individuals are trying to share with the company.
Yeah, I feel like that the anonymity part is important because I feel like no one wants to be singled out, of course, even though feedback sometimes involves that. But do you feel like we could ever do you feel like in all circumstances anonymity is the best method to take feedback for an organization, or do you think in some cases that it should be looked at from a personal level? Like if you're a manager, do you always want to kind of look at it through just the lens of the nuts and bolts of it? Like there was this issue with person A and person B dealt with it this way, it wasn't great. Let's take their personalities out of it. Or do you always need to look at that factor? Or is there kind of a gray area?
I would definitely say it's a gray area. It is really situational specific. I think for individual development, in order for a manager to support that employee in the best way possible, that I encourage that to be a more open line of communication so that they can consider the specific circumstance, the individuals involved, what was on their plate, what were the goals of that particular assignment, let's say, and be able to provide growth and development feedback in the context of that situation. And for it to be most actionable, that manager needs to know who the individual is in order to help them in the best way. I think there are clearly other circumstances where if say the issue is perhaps that the individual is having a hard time with their manager or supervisor and they are seeking support from the organization to help them work through those challenges, obviously it'd be a lot harder for them to go directly to the supervisor and say, I've got a real problem with you. Maybe in a super transparent organization that's built on a culture like that, it can be accepted. But I think for most organizations, that's probably something that would be scary for individuals to do. So in those cases, I think that's why you have to provide that additional avenue. And I really do encourage people to use their human resources department, their employee relations department as an advocate for them to help in those opportunities. And then I think the other piece where it isn't always necessary to have or that tying it back to a specific individual isn't always the best path is when an organization is looking for feedback more broadly around a program or an experience. Do employees feel like they understand their what's being asked of them? Are employees able to bring their skills to bear in their roles on a regular basis? I think those types of questions that are getting to how are we doing as an organization and a business can still be very valuable if they're aggregated and allow that kind of anonymity that we talked about.
That makes a lot of sense. So switching subjects a little bit. I've always thought in my research practice, I look at this a little bit, that, kind of the first few interactions you have with your future employer are really going to be the ones that could potentially last the longest, especially if they're not good. If they're good, you probably are like, okay, that was normal, and you move on. And if it was amazing, I'm sure you'd remember it as well. And I know you've written, or co-authored a book called Successful Onboarding. And I know it's one of the first books to outline creating strategic onboarding programs at scale to kind of unlock talent and values. What would you say are kind of the key methods for doing that for someone who hasn't read or who's listening who hasn't read the book? And what would you say is the best way to make the best first impression for a company? So, or if that even matters, or if it's really just, let's get this person to work as quickly as possible, and then let's start making a first impression, or does it start from like kind of day zero? So what are kind of the strategies and takeaways from the book?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Dylan. I definitely think it starts at the very beginning, day zero, as you said. That has to do with how the organization portrays themselves on their website, in LinkedIn, what their employees say about them, even what their customers say about them in social media or out in public. All of that can inform whether it's a place someone seeks out and they want to work there or not. Honestly, same thing goes for the individual, right? In terms of what they're putting out into the space, I guess, in terms of their social media presence, the way that they present themselves in that application or on their resume, all of those elements of first impressions kind of go both ways. What I think is really important for organizations as they're thinking about that first impression is to not try to oversell in that first impression, because that can sometimes be they're tripping up on themselves before they even get started in the recruiting process. So an example may be if you're an organization that is undergoing transformation, you are a process-based company today, you're selling a product that is sold to business customers, and they're buying a product and using that product on a regular basis. But what you're pivoting to is more around service and being able to provide consultation, let's say, that accompanies that use of that product. And that's where the company's looking to grow. As you're positioning yourself to candidates, it's important to talk about that change and not say, today we're a services company and service is what comes first between us and our employees, because then you're creating perhaps a false impression around what it's going to be like when that employee arrives. So it's really important to be consistent and transparent around where are we today, and maybe what aspect is aspirational. And that also goes with the process. There may be maybe a plan in the future that the talent experiences are going to be white glove and everything is buttoned up and it's going to be one step to the next and it's a super easy process. But if through the recruiting and then the onboarding, nobody tells the new hire where to show up on day one or when to log into a system and be virtually welcomed, they're already falling down right at the very beginning. So probably I could go on and give you even more examples as to why that first impression is important. The other pieces that I believe really laid the groundwork and allow for an organization to have an experience that helps support their new hires in the best way and allows them to operate at their best is to think about, yes, the experience and the impressions that you're going to have, but then it's also the content that goes into it. It's onboarding is a lot more than just getting the paperwork done or getting the employee provisioned with the equipment that they need. That's important for sure, but beyond that, it's got to be helping them to understand the culture and how to thrive in that culture. Doing that through, it can be one-on-ones with managers, it could be through peer group discussions, having a buddy or something like that that helps them kind of walk that path in their early days with the organization. It's talking about strategy so they can connect the dots. How does their day-to-day and the role that they're playing help support the overall success of the organization? Helping them make connections and networks within the company or even external to it sometimes. And then providing that career support, growth, and development, the feedback that we talked about earlier, and doing that on a regular basis. I think those 4 key elements, combined with making sure you've got a tight process, you get them provisioned, and you provide the training that you need, is really what makes for the foundation for a great program.
Yeah, I do feel like something you mentioned earlier is something that really kind of struck a chord with me, just because I feel like prior to me having this role, I was looking online for jobs, and so many companies I feel like get too hyperbolic with what they do there. It's like, okay, you sell software, let's maybe be realistic about what actually happens. And I know everyone always jokes that in tech the word like disrupting is used all the time.
Absolutely.
But at a certain point, it does become a bit of an eye roll. And I think it's really important what you said. Let's separate what actually occurs here, and like point A to point B of every day or every week or every month of what actually happens, to set realistic expectations. I think that kind of circles back to the cultural aspect you talked about earlier, because if you start off out of the gates being like, wowza guys, like look at this company we have, like, it's not like, we keep expectations real. It's not like every day is going to be we're planning the next moon landing.
Absolutely.
I think if they keep people's expectations realistic, because it does for me personally, it left a bad impression, because when I would see that, I'd be like, I don't want to work for someone like this. It's
Right.
just, it's not that attitude is not the company. It seems like there's a detachment from reality.
Yeah,
in a
that's
sense.
exactly right. And if you internalize that, if they're that detached overall from reality, how is that going to play to you as an individual? Are the expectations for you going to be potentially, out of control in terms of the hyperbole there that you're looking to accomplish? It's funny what you said. I'm like, if every company was as disruptive as they say they are, I don't know how we'd all keep up.
Yeah, it would be the world would be upside down.
Yeah, it would, or
Yeah.
everything would be solved, right? We would have world peace and we would have for all of the cancer. So one or the other.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and for sure, there are some places that do entirely every day embody that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And but I do feel like with those companies, they do kind of tame it down a bit
Mhm. That
because
that's
the
a really
reputation precedes them, I guess, in that
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. That's a great point and reminds me of something else I often kind of point out or caution organizations with, that when you see companies like that that we all look at and admire, either because of the business that they're impacting and the way that they're supporting, whether it's growth from a business and financial standpoint, or it's the impact they're having on the world, or a population of people, or that they're always a best place to work, we can admire that, but it doesn't necessarily mean every company should try to emulate those specific practices. Because it's got to be something that'll work within your business, your culture, the constraints that you're working in. If that was one, yeah, I think many years ago, around when we had first written the book, that was when people were really starting to pay attention to onboarding. And you heard about Facebook and Google and others having giant parties at the end of their new hire week and having bands come in and inviting all of their new hires. And it was a great celebration. That makes a lot of sense for those businesses at that point in time, but it didn't necessarily mean that every organization needed to have that kind of an experience and that kind of a budget to engage their employees and set them up for success.
Yeah, for sure. Because at a certain point, it's just you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And maybe the people you're attracting are maybe not the type that want that. Otherwise, maybe they would go look to work at a place like
Mhm.
that throws these big parties or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Looking at the technology aspect of all this, how do you feel? Like I've always thought that, like, part of the big help that AI will bring is, and I've been kind of sorry to keep interrupting myself here, but like the train of thought is that AI is meant to has had a lot of promises, and new technology always has a lot of promises, some of which are valid. And with the AI and kind of digital assistant trend of it all, it's that, oh, it's going to take this much more work off the plate of a human being so they can focus on XYZ with other human beings.
Right. Mhm.
One thing interesting I heard in another interview I did recently was that uh, the woman I spoke to was saying that seems to be the narrative, but in reality, it just seems like there's always more work that's coming that is still preventing me from interacting with people. Do you feel like that trend that's true, or do you feel like there is actually a lot of promise here to actually deburden, take the burden off of managers so they can, have a coffee with their employee instead of like crunching numbers for an hour?
Yeah. I um I think it's going to be both ways, unfortunately. And, it's not a simple answer. I think there are roles and activities where AI is absolutely having that positive impact, that it is removing the need for an individual to do something repetitive. In the HR space, even, let's talk about resume review and being able to review a stack of 1,000 resumes and come up with a subset that is a more likely set of good potential candidates. that used to have to be done by individuals all of the time. And now I think AI can come in a way and help save some of that time as it relates to specific recruiters. But it's not going to replace everything, nor should it, right? We want to have that human expertise, their perspective and gut and intuition come into play throughout the process as well. And I would also think that part of it is maybe that we need to have appropriate expectations too around what it can do. It's going to free up my time over here. And if my goal is to be engaging with my employees more over here, that's where I'm trying to get to. We may discover, and I think in the example of the other individual you were speaking with, is that we solved this problem, but then it actually opened up a new door. And there's something else here that now we need to tackle and figure out how to solve that issue before we can necessarily pivot and have that 100% face time with our employees. So I think maybe it's looking at AI as it's going to solve one, and then it opens up a little bit of a door to what our goal is, but then it also at the same time opens up a door to a new challenge that we also need to solve. But I think that's part of what's exciting about it, is allowing us as leaders, individuals, managers, and the way that we engage with AI to get some of the benefit that we're looking for. And then it's around learning what's next and how do we program it or feed it data or tackle a new task, learn something new that will help both the AI and ourselves so that we can, continue to get closer and closer to that ideal state in terms of, in this case, in more human interaction with our employees.
And in terms of, the kind of the technology needing to align with a company's goals, how would you advise someone who is looking to invest in technology, especially if they're a smaller, medium-sized business with, maybe a stricter budget? How would you advise them to look at this technology from an HR perspective and to say, okay, it's worth buying, or let's think about this a bit more, and what metrics do you think they should be factoring in? Because obviously everyone wants that shiny new object, but sometimes that shiny object has zero value to you. But what are some good strategies to shape their thinking on this and to maybe frame the way they evaluate the technology?
Well, I think at first it comes with needing to start around being really crisp and solid on what the goals are that the organization's looking to achieve. And where are the places where that as a talent leader, you feel like there's an opportunity to have the greatest impact on the business by investing in a technology or a solution that helps you solve a particular problem. On the one hand, I think it's an incredible time to be in HR and to be looking at technology options because they are proliferating. I swear every day it seems like there's a new company that's entering the market with a particular solution that solves something that hasn't been solved before, or trying to make that widget a little bit better. So it's great in terms of there being options. The downside of that, of course, as a potential buyer, is where do you start and what's the right place to make that first investment. And I think the only way you can guide yourself on that is being really clear on the front end around what's the problem you're trying to solve and what's the impact that you're looking to drive. And then being able to consider all of the potential options you have. I think as a smaller to medium-sized business, the answer is probably not in a big HRIS. Well, I shouldn't even have said big, but like a solution that tries to accomplish multiple facets of supporting HR or talent management. I think as a smaller organization, you're better off looking at a technology that can solve one problem really well, and you can be able to quantify, see the impact of that more easily, and be able to return value to the business as well as see the enhancement from an employee experience standpoint, and make more progress there rather than trying to look for a technology that maybe solves your recruiting challenges and your performance management problems, or the issues that you have there in terms of maybe inefficiency and elements like that. I would say to start small and specific in a way that aligns with helping to achieve your goals from a talent standpoint, and then aligns to having a specific business impact.
Very interesting. Well, Lilith, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It was great having you. Tell the people where they can find you, and if you're up for anything in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. So as we mentioned at the very beginning, or when you introduced me, I've just launched my new consultancy called HumanGenuity. You can probably tell by that I'm really focused on the people side of the business and putting in place programs and processes that allows the individuals to reach their full potential within the company. I think as we talked about through our discussion around AI and technology, that can be a tool that really helps us and helps businesses achieve next level, but we can't do it without the humans in the business being there to influence it, to train it, and provide their ingenuity around helping a business to succeed. So that's really my focus. I'm really interested in and engaging with organizations that want to invest in their people in order to drive better business outcomes. Since I've just launched, I don't have a website up yet, but it will be coming soon. So in the meantime, you can connect with me via LinkedIn. Again, it's Lilith Christiansen, and my organization is HumanGenuity.
Cool. Well, with that, thank you everyone for listening. Lilith, thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thanks for the time, Dylan.